The Artist, Season of Storms, Year 1. There was more rain than he had ever heard in his life. He had always thought that rain sounded gentle, even when it was tainted with the same burns that he had been doing his best to keep under wraps and out of sight. But the rain that had been following them as the seasons changed was aggressive and all-consuming, overwhelming the chatter of their tiny group, the sound of hidden animals, and all but the fury of the clouds above. Still, Zhao wasn't too bothered by it. The rain was so cold that it cut, sure enough. But you could leave out a tarp of leaves and get fresh water from it, that'd have seemed like a miracle enough, back home. Back elsewhere, he half-heartedly corrected himself. And Bones didn't care at all, the old skeleton serving as both advisor and mobile shelter for the occasional drenched animal that hid beneath his strangely rain-resistant shawl. Whatever there had once been on Bones himself, rain and age had long since bleached him clean. Perhaps at first it had been a bit scary, but then Zambi had developed an idea. And now they were wearing ponchos. It had taken some time, but Bones apparently loved to sew, and with patient evaluating of the various roots and fibrous clothes, the two had gotten some pretty nice new duds. Bones apparently had sentimental attachments to his old rags, however, and refused with peals of creaky laughter when the two tried to press him into becoming a poncho bro. But the travels had been long, too, and without time to stop and gather provisions, Zhao had started to realize how dangerous the place was. Zambi had a pretty good head on what was edible and what wasn't, and they could usually get 2 meals a day, which was a little more than he was used to. But sometimes, they ended up going without food entirely, just marching through flood-congealed dirt that felt oddly solid underfoot. Zambi brought him back out of his reverie as she stepped into a particularly large puddle, or something like one, as geysers of steaming water shot up into their faces, her arms outstretched to the point that they looked almost like wings within her poncho. The droplets faded as quickly as they rose, leaving the two somewhat confounded in front of a particularly sulphurous-smelling geyser. Bones, who had been making headway on them at his slow and steady pace, turned back towards them, HRMing thoughtfully to himself.
I know this might sound bad, but I kinda wanna do that again.
Zambi vocalized surreptitiously, toe prodding the vent cautiously, though no steam returned from it.
Maybe we could use it to power a train or something.
Zhao's enthusiasm died down quickly as he realized that probably wasn't how steam power worked, but the idea still seemed kind of cool. Maybe something to be filed down for later.
I vaguely recall legends talking about such vents being the breath of a great monster that sleeps beneath the earth.
Bones began, walking straight onto the vent. Almost immediately a wave of heat and steam exploded from the point, blinding Zhao and Zambi and throwing the skeleton backward, though otherwise leaving him unharmed.
We should probably be very careful around here. I had assumed the Necessity would be easier to reach. I was so certain that the city was around here somewhere.
He had been adamant that a city formed of refugees and very nice people was hidden nestled between the forestry sea, but so far they had found no trace of it, though thankfully, no trace of any pursuers either.
Maybe the city flew up into the stratosphere on one of the steam vents,
Zambi suggested, grinning. Bones looked up, not laughing.
Stranger things have happened. I wonder if it did, and if it shall come back down. Hey, Bones, bro, I was totes joking. Don't consider that seriously.
But Bones was now looking solemnly up at the canopy above, clearly deep in thought. Zhao decided to take initiative, and patted the old skeleton on the shoulder.
Even if the place isn't here anymore, we can still keep looking for it, right? Of course. I just don't want to have led you two children this far for nothing. We might have been able to reclaim that land if I hadn't suggested looking for Nishadi.
Bones fretted, wringing his skeletal wrists together with an awful grinding sound.
I don't think we would have followed you if we hadn't wanted to, Bones. When we find Necessity, we can all take a rest for a while. A warm fire and some dry clothes sound kind of nice, don't they? Speak for yourself. I only want to wear this poncho, forever.
Zambi interrupted with great confidence, curling the garment around her like a bat-plant hybrid.
Well, okay, I'd like a warm fire and some dry clothes. And maybe not having to fret about whether I've boiled roots so long that they've become gnarly, or too briefly to be safe to eat.
Zambi was about to wrap her arm around Zhao, but stopped midway and pulled back. She had been doing that a lot recently, and Zhao wasn't sure what to think about it. She must have seen that he was about to comment about it, and cut him off by shooting him a big grin and the double guns. Even though she wasn't moving, she toppled from toe to toe, and Zhao wondered not for the first time if she had her own entire rhythm that none but she heard.
We've got you covered there. I mean, I know it hasn't seemed like it recently, but Bones is for sure the best navigator in the world. If his memory says there was a town here, there was almost definitely a town here. I don't doubt it, Zams. Zams. Well, yeah, I just thought, I guess it sounds kind of like yams, so if it's a problem or something. No, dude, it's cool. I like it. Don't expect me to think of a nickname for you that fast, brother. I've got a million different things going in this head of mine, and unfortunately nicknaming isn't one of my many skills.
Once again, Zambi stated what anyone else would have said self-deprecatingly as a matter of personal pride. Her cheer was permanently infectious, Zhao felt. And the brief realization hit him, would he have gotten this far if it had been just himself, alone? The unpleasant thought didn't linger too long on his mind, as Bones' strange laughter reached his ears.
You know, I had quite the series of pet names, when I was alive. I cannot remember even one of them, but I know that I made quite the name for myself.
Zambi threw herself in front of Bones, walking backwards and flapping her arms up and down, perhaps for no other reason than because she could.
Wayayot. You had crazy adventures, and you're remembering them. Tell us. Come on, bro. Our holy trinity of secret keepers won't just up and tell anyone, but now my curiosity is at its max level. Zhao, back me up. Sure, I'll bite. For some reason, I can see you as being some sort of stunt pilot in an airplane, or a famous marine biologist or something like that.
Zhao added, trying to remember the sort of people he had admired reading about from the past, and not being able to remember even their names. He wondered if that was how Bones felt most of the time.
Oh ho! I can't say that I was a pilot, or however that is. No carriage racing for this old man. And I don't think I ever was a particularly good scholar, though I think I wanted to be. There's always time for that, bro.
Zambi interjected encouragingly.
Maybe we could revolutionize Earth sciences together? Man, think how cool that'd be.
Placing her hands behind her head and grinning at an imagined future, Zambi stumbled into a puddle as she walked backwards. A puddle that was in fact another geyser. Zhao panicked as jets of steam exploded forth, but somehow the plant girl managed to fall at just the right angle that she rolled down a tiny hill and into a log, wriggling around in it for some time before jumping out unharmed.
I'm fine. I'm fine. Continue on. I'll just not do that in the future.
Not looking particularly earnest, Zambi returned to walking at their side, face forward. For now.
I'll consider your offer, Zambi. About scholarship. I would like to try to gather my thoughts to paper, sometime. It would be nice to do it with friends, sometime. I sometimes get so tired, you know, and lose focus of what I was thinking of. I imagine that even if you filled in for me during such times, the result would be pleasant to read.
It was impossible to tell for certain whether Bones was ever truly grinning, but it was also impossible to mistake the tenor in his voice when the old skeleton was truly happy. Some things made even the chilling rain less of a burden.
But you asked for raw details, and just because I'm old doesn't mean I can't be hip. HRM. I do recall that there was a young man, a friend of mine. I think. Maybe he was an enemy, or something else. People tend to blend together in my mind. Did you duel him at dawn?
Zambi asked, pulling her poncho over her head anxiously.
No, but I did challenge him to a foot race through a cavern that was covered with crystals of a deep azure. It was a dangerous place, we were forbidden from going. I got lost. But it was entirely worth it. For in the center of the cave, I remember finding a place where you could speak, and the cavern would return your voice with perfect harmony. That sounds beautiful, Bones.
Zhao said thoughtfully, trying to imagine a young, not entirely skeletal Bones and failing miserably.
Did your friend/enemy/something find you? He had fallen down a chasm. I helped him up, somehow, but at the time neither of us were scared, it just seemed awfully funny. It's strange, how the things that should scare you most end up seeming so silly in retrospect, sometimes. Oh.
Bones gasped, stopping in mid-step. Ahead of them, several apparitions hung low to the ground, whitish wisps tinged with red. They had no visible features, no eyes nor lips nor fingers. No feathers or fur, no hair, no pores lined their blank expanse, and they did not react as the trio passed them by, although they did turn to watch as they did.
Emanations, here. I cannot help but wonder who is so strong-willed as to work such beings into existence.
Trying to remember what emanations meant, Zhao furrowed his brow and asked.
So, emanations. They're kind of like cast-offs of someone else. Close enough. Someone is probably determined to do something here. Someone like you, and unlike myself or Zembi. If a person with such a will has enough internal reason, it is possible that they subconsciously form servants in their own image. Emanations, if you will. Are they dangerous? They kinda looked cute, but I'm not 125% behind the whole complete lack of discernible features thing.
Zambi mused, turning her head to one and making a face. It did nothing in response.
Unfortunately, they could be, given time. But for now, they are too ill-formed and ill-defined to do much of anything. Think of them as eggs that could grow into helpful spiders that stand watch over a patch of your garden, or turn out to be larvae that hunger insatiably for your orchids, and your orchids only.
Bones crossed his arms, head bobbing from side to side.
I honestly do not know what this portends. I cannot remember the last time someone ended up creating emanations. We'll want to look into it, given time. For now, let's pay them no heed, and simply keep making our way forward. The fact that they're present probably means someone is nearby, at least. Perhaps we shall be lucky, and find a new friend.
But his optimism died soon enough, for as the forest opened suddenly ahead of them, they stumbled upon the settlement of Nesity. It was clear that once, this had been a town within the forest. A peaceful land, whose inhabitants had lived in something resembling harmony. And it was clear that it had only been days before, perhaps, when this had been shattered. Ruined fragments of timber walls still smoked from an unnatural fire, their blackened char still occasionally red with embers. The burnt-out husks of buildings that still had some traces of freshly redone paint stood as monuments of vibrant colors contrasted with violent devastation. So ruined were the ashes of the town, it was impossible to tell what had happened to the inhabitants, though particularly large, and particularly small, piles of cinders alluded to things that made Zhao nauseous, and eventually he kept his eyes off the ground. Upon the ruins of a particularly tall building that appeared to have once been a town center of some kind, a great crimson bird perched, apparently asleep. Its wings wrapped around it like a blanket, and wrapped around what had once been a bell roost for support. As the three approached in near silence, save for the snap of burnt twigs under their footfall, the avian slowly unwrapped itself and exposed a sharp-beaked face and lidded eyes, sharp and unapproachable.
Visitors. It appears you came at a lucky time. I can only imagine what might have happened had you been here a day and a night earlier. For one, we would not be talking now, would we? And what a tragedy might that be. Do you know what happened here?
Zhao pleaded, running towards the base of the town hall. The dusky-voiced bird nodded her head slowly, expression neutral.
I do, though I'm afraid I cannot and will not recount it to you. Natural disaster or the act of a cruel man, I shall leave it to you three to decide what befell this place. Please.
Bones shuffled forward, slowly, brokenly.
I think I knew people who lived here, once. Is everyone? They are all dead, or gone. I cannot imagine the survivors made it far.
The great bird stuck her neck under the span of her wing, obscuring all but the piercing glare of her eyes.
I'd be remiss if I pretended to say I knew anyone her, or that I felt sympathy for those lost, but that doesn't mean I do not grieve, all the same. It would be unwise to linger here long. it is not impossible that whatever destroyed this place will come back again, simply to make sure nothing grows anew on these salted lands.
Wait! Zhao cried again, even as she rose in a flutter of red and gold.
Come with us. At least tell us your name.
Dulcet laughter that didn't sound at all like that of a bird echoed from the now lazily circling harpy, who stared down at the tiny dots before her with a critical eye.
Oh, kindly fool! Would that I were young and naive enough to accept your offer, though I will tell you my name. I am the Duchess, Crimsolino. Behold the ruin I have wrought, and carve the regret you feel onto your hearts. Let it stay there and grow until you can feel nothing else but hatred for my name. And let you carry the word of all who would live in safety far upon the wind.
She howled with an enraged self-hatred he had never heard before, and her words were more ferocious than the beating of her wings. But before he could decide how he felt or how to respond, a gust of air had knocked the three of them to the ground, and the harpy had left with a horrendous cry, and they were alone amongst the embers. Zhao couldn't tell when he had regained the ability to feel anything but numb. His shoulder was burning, because Zambi's hand was there, but the pain was proof he was alive, and he didn't want her to pull away. Bones was kneeling down in the ground, not saying anything or even moving. Dust and ash occasionally blew past him on the wind and up into the rain, but the old skeleton did nothing.
I can't even cry, you know,
he stated, matter-of-factly.
And perhaps I didn't even know anyone here, after all. I suppose it's unlikely I'll ever be certain. Not that it matters. Do you think she was serious when she said that? Do you think she torched this entire place?
Zhao whispered, unsure if he was crying or not, or even if he was talking aloud.
I dunno. I kind of think anyone who announces something like that aloud, they can't be serious, right? And I mean, we don't really have anyone else to confirm it.
Zambi paused, then half helped and half forced Zhao to his feet. He started to feel the sting of the rain again, and his breathing, harsh and ragged against the storm.
Thank you. I can't judge anyone on just that. It's too terrible, and I refuse. Almost everyone I knew back elsewhere did some stuff they regretted. Maybe it's the same for her.
Though it wasn't really my call to judge, a quiet voice whispered in the back of his mind. Bones slowly got up, patting the small pile of ash that had accumulated around his feet.
Even if I knew for certain, I wouldn't jump to conclusions. I'm too old for that. Too old. But I do feel an incredible regret. May we stay here, for the night? I do not know where to go, anymore, and I have work I would like to do. Please.
Zhao nodded before Bones had even finished.
Of course. Even if we knew that whoever did this was coming back for certain, I'd stay with a friend. You in, Zambi? You don't even have to ask. Besides, I think I might have an idea, kind of a crazy one. But it might help us out, in the long run. But I need to think about it, a bit. Yep.
She was very plaintively not looking at Bones, and the expression on her face made it all but apparent that whatever idea she had, it was secondary towards a concern for the still slowly puttering skeleton, who didn't seem to be truly aware where he stepped, or what he was doing. They set up camp in the relatively well-preserved ruins of the town hall. Several walls had been coated in posters, perhaps, or paintings. The telltale burnt marks on the wall were tape or some kind of glue had been heated to the point of becoming pitch-like in consistency, the only reminder of the building's former purpose. Zhao had rigged the sleeping bag up after the rain had gotten especially harsh, though it might have been more realistic to call it a really big leaf that sort of worked as a blanket. It felt like the storm was distant, even calming when the rain wore down against the roof, even if a few stray droplets did wend their way through the open door or the ruined holes in the shell of the building. Bones had been busy all night, digging and moving earth. He had refused any effort to help, and any effort to clarify what he was doing, though it was obvious enough. His graves were modest and without any sort of markers, for none of them had known anyone here. But they were graves, all the same. Turning in his role in the hopes of becoming marginally more comfortable and getting some sleep, Zhao found himself face to face with Zambi, who had probably been waiting for some time.
Hey! Can we take a walk? Please.
Glad he had managed to flailing around in surprise, Zhao nodded. Though crawling free from the relative comfort and warmth of the sleeping bag took some effort as the reality of the cold damp returned to him. Outside, the sky was surprisingly bright, with no moon or moons in sight, but a pale glow coming from somewhere over the horizon. It occurred to Zhao that he didn't even really know what time it was, or if there was a unified system of measuring time in the island. Zambi's lips were pursed as she led him, with surprising, but perhaps not too surprising, stealth past where Bones was working, and into the forest proper. The familiar darkness of the tree line was comforting in a way, as was walking by her. Zambi moved erratically, stopping from time to time to check over her shoulder.
"He's not taking this well,"
she said after they had walked for some time in the waning light that made her green hair seem darker than it was, and occasionally obscured her from view.
"Yeah. I know. I don't really know what to do. I feel so powerless."
Zhao frowned, stopping to look down at his feet. Water pooled around them, and he wondered for a moment what it'd feel like to just plant them down in the ground, like roots. It took him a while to realize that Zambi was tentatively kicking hers against his.
"Don't. Seriously don't. I mean, I do too, but that's kind of... you know. Ugh. It's majorly ugh, and the worst part is, I dunno if I would have noticed as much if we had just been walking through the place. I mean, this isn't the first place I've seen destroyed. I have to wonder how many he's seen come and go."
Her foot stopped against his, and then just stopped. Zambi was at a complete standstill, and her motionlessness frightened him.
So. I was thinking. Can you absorb nutrients from the earth or something like that?"
Smooth. His subconsciousness screamed at him, slamming itself into the brick wall his mind felt like. Fortunately, Zambi managed a little smile, twisting in place a bit.
"Nah, I mean, maybe, but I don't think so. Sunlight feels pretty rad, but I think that's just part of being alive, right? Whether you're meaty or planty or bony. Can you?"
He laughed, though her expression was serious. Zhao thought about it for a while, and shrugged.
"I don't think humans are quite that sedentary, though it seems like it'd be an interesting idea for a sculpture. Zambi."
He could feel his fingers tapping against the back of his head, hear the worn synthetic rubber in his sneakers giving out from the rain and overuse.
"It'll be okay. Bones'll be okay, and we'll be okay. Thanks for supporting me earlier, and just, you know."
She smiled in a way she knew he understood, and placed out her hand. Without hesitation, he placed his to hers. As they made their way back, Zhao kicked his sneakers off, and then his socks. The ground wasn't very rough, and the strange slurry that the rain seemed to congeal into at points was better than any of the roads back home, though a little peculiar in terms of texture.
"The shot of my idea is, we kind of tried to make a secret base, right? And then we found out that things are bad here. Real bad. I was thinking we could try to make a town. And people could come and be refugees or something. I know, right? It's pretty great."
Zambi wasn't quite as animated as usual, but it was good to see her back in action, and as for the plan, it sounded nice. He wanted to do something, Zhao knew. He didn't want to fight or cause any trouble, ever. But he felt like he had to try, and maybe, just maybe.
"So, where were you thinking? Right here, as a symbol or something?"
Zambi shook her head in a green blur, until she made herself slightly dizzy and teetered to the side.
"Hell no. That's the best part, I think. Hopefully."
Bones had finished his work as they approached, and was silently slouched over an edifice of petrified wood. He wasn't moving much, and Zhao figured that even though he was tireless, that didn't mean he couldn't feel exhausted. Somehow, he heard the two approach and managed to shamble toward them, looking and sounding better, if still lost in thought.
"Out for a midnight stroll? I do suppose it's still midnight? Perhaps it isn't, dear me. I'm sorry for not letting you help, but I wanted to do this myself." "Thank you."
The latter comment was added on, Bones bobbing his head humbly downwards in a clumsy bow.
No problem, Bones. No, I mean, you're welcome. For the record, I wanted to help, though. I just didn't know what to say, and I'd like to apologize for that, whether it matters or not.
Zhao said hastily, tripping over his words. But he felt like they made sense, if only because Bones placed a skeletal hand on his shoulder, and clasped it tightly.
That goes for me, too. And, okay, I dunno if this is crazy enough to work or crazy enough that it's just crazy, but I've been thinking. Your memory is still good enough that you remember where those caves you mentioned are.
Bones looked up at Zemby, pausing pensively.
I do believe so. Why? We're going to rebuild all the things.
Lightning punctuated her hand as she threw them towards the sky, and Zemby jumped nearly her height into the air, then fell and landed in the mud.
Okay, I wasn't quite expecting the poorly timed ambience, but, I mean, if it wouldn't seem like it would be offensive to the memories of people, I kinda thought that between us three, we could totally make a pretty cool town. And, who's going to think of raiding caves when they want to raid towns? Natural defensiveness.
Zemby leapt from toe to toe, semi-gracefully shaking the mud off as she did. She watched Bones hopefully, and Zhao realized he had been watching her, and moved to watch Bones as well. The skeleton was nodding back and forth slightly, as if he were engaged in a tiny conversation with himself.
I don't know if you can be offensive to memories, really. After all, they're just that. Memories.
His voice was more somber and glum than it had been before, but Bones wasn't finished, and as he spoke he became more and more confident.
The two of you are good friends. More than memories, I know that spirit is what led to the founding of towns like Necessity in the first place. It would be my pleasure to try to build one with the two of you. Let me lead the way. That's what I'm talking about.
Zemby cheered, and two butt heads with surprising force. Zhao wasn't entirely certain why, but apparently it meant something to his companions, because they both laughed, then bumped knuckles. Zemby shot him a grin, and Zhao did too. And even though the rain wouldn't let up for weeks yet, the future seemed like it might yet be bright, even as far ahead, a blur of carmine and saffron watched with resignation as she listened to the excited voices below, then vanished on the wind. Chapter end.